Today we are going to talk about Chapter 7 Hypothesis Test in Chieh-Chen Bowen's Straightforward Statistics. In hypothesis test, there are two very important type of mistakes we need to talk about. We need to know exactly how to define them and when do we make which kind of mistakes and which mistake is worse. Okay, so based on all that, we are going to introduce the jury trial as an analogy to help understand and illustrate these topics. In the legal system, the defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And if in a trial there is not enough evidence to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant has committed the crime, the alleged crime, the defendant must be found not guilty. I think that is a very basic principle everybody understood in this country. So it's important to point out that not guilty is actually the starting point of a legal trial. So it would be up to the prosecutor to actually collecting all the evidence, trying to dispute the not guilty assumption. So the evidence will then be presented to the jury, and the jury will come to the decision whether the verdict will be guilty or not guilty. In the next table, we will see we are facing with unknown reality, and that's the reality we'll probably never be able to find out what's happening there. And it's separated, or it can be broken down into two possible situations. One is the defendant did not do it, and the other one is the defendant did it. So as you can probably understand, these two situations would not be true at the same time. It's one or the other. In the jury decision, there are two possible decisions. One is guilty, one is not guilty. And again, it's one or the other decision. It will not be both at the same time. Okay, with those two unknown reality and two possible jury decision, in combination, we are facing with four possible outcomes out of any kind of legal trial here. The first one is when defendant did not do it, but the jury decision come out to be guilty. So it's a mistake. And this mistake means you are sending an innocent person in jail for the crime he or she did not commit. The second outcome here happens when defendant did not do it, and the jury decision come out to be not guilty. So not guilty, the defendant didn't do it, it means it's a correct decision. Okay, the third situation, the third possible outcome right here happens when defendant did it, jury verdict came out to be guilty. So you got the guy who actually committed the crime. So that's great. Great job. Correct decision right there. Okay, now let's take a look at the last one. The last one right here labeled as mistake 2. It happens when defendant did it and the jury decision came out to be not guilty. So obviously you let the guilty person go. So mistake number 2 and mistake number 1 are both undesirable. However, one is worse than the other. You probably need to think about it on your own. Which one is worse? Putting an innocent person in jail or let a guilty person go? Which one is worse? Let me give you a hint. In both mistakes, in both conditions, you didn't get the right person who are responsible for the crime. But in mistake number one, on top you didn't get the right person who's responsible, you also put an innocent person in jail. You, in this kind of situation, ruin people's life. In the process of doing a research, researcher has to first declare the purpose of doing particular study. And the way they declare the purpose is by share of hypothesis. The first one is the null hypothesis, HO. Is the statement that the researcher directly tests with empirical data. HO is the null effect hypothesis. The second one is the alternative hypothesis, H1. H1 stated the relationship that researchers are interested in, thus H1 is also referred to as the research hypothesis. The null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis are mutually exclusive statements describing population parameters. So basically, those two hypotheses would not be true at the same time. Why bother to state a no effect hypothesis than try to reject it, try to dispute it? The reason to assume the study has no effect unless there is strong evidence to reject the no effect hypothesis, it's to establish a standard scientific procedure to guard against anyone falsely claim a treatment effect when such effect does not exist. If you in West Africa, at that point, if you look online, you will find a lot of different websites claim they have the right product to cure Ebola. However, they are no more than a bunch of con artists using fear trying to make money. And that's the reason for scientific research to start. The starting point for scientific research has to be HO. It's a no effect hypothesis unless you have strong empirical evidence to reject that null hypothesis. Okay, now applying the same logic of the jury trial to hypothesis testing, there are two possible scenarios of the unknown reality in the research world. HO is true and HO is. There are also two possible research decisions: reject HO and fail to reject HO. When we put those two unknown reality and two research decisions, again, we see this table. There are four possible outcomes. These four possible outcomes, the first one, HO is true, when the no effect hypothesis is actually true, but the researcher decided to reject HO. They rejected something that is true. They make a mistake, so this is a type 1 error. And the second outcome is when HO is true, the researcher didn't find enough evidence to reject HO, so their conclusion has to be fail to reject HO. So they just kind of leave HO stand alone, and But in reality, HO is actually true, so that's a good decision. That's a correct decision right here. The third outcome is when HO is false. When the no effect hypothesis is false, and the researcher decide to reject HO, you reject something that's false. Actually, it's a great decision. Correct decision right there. No problem. The last outcome is HO is false, and the researcher failed to reject the HO. HO is false, failed to reject HO. You're making the mistakes. So basically it says, in reality, the no effect hypothesis is false, which means that the effect actually exists. But failed to reject HO, the researcher just didn't find enough evidence in their study. So you failed to identify an effect. It actually exists. You just let a good opportunity of scientific discovery go. So that's what type 2 error means. And let's take a look of the other mistake, type 1 error. Type 1 error means you reject the HO. Remember, you need to have strong evidence to be able to do that. But for whatever reason, the researcher thought they have strong evidence, but in reality, HO is true. So they falsely claim an effect that in reality does not exist. So that is a problem. So in scientific research, it is very important for scientists to do no harm. And when falsely claim an effect that in reality that does not exist, will introduce a useless treatment to the general population. It could possibly harm them. And that's why collectively in the scientific community, we decide that type 1 error is worse than type 2 error. Type 2 error, you miss an opportunity for discovery. Well, maybe it's a bad luck. Maybe you're just not smart enough to find that effect. Somebody, somewhere, somehow, maybe another group of researchers sooner or later will find that effect. So in this 2 type of error, we need to keep the type 1 error under control. So that's it for today.